All right, we're going to kick it off this afternoon with our first presenter. Welcome back. I hope you're energized, refreshed, and ready to dive into this afternoon's sessions. I think as we all know, especially in the GCC, we're evolving faster than ever. Markets are shifting, technologies are emerging, expectations are changing, and new challenges appear without warning. We live in what is referred to as a VUCA world. VUCA is an armed forces terminology and acronym. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And in such an environment, success does not belong to the strongest nor the most experienced. It belongs to those who can adapt, learn, lead, and move forward despite uncertainty. Our next speaker specializes in preparing leaders for these realities, helping them turn disruption into advantage, confusion into clarity, and uncertainty into strategic action. This sounds like somebody who's in a James Bond movie that's going to ensure the safety and security and future of the modern world. You need like a superhero costume for the job that you do based on how we're describing you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Managing Director at Certification Edge, Mr. Ajibola Bamidele. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I see you got a headset, so you mean business. Are you going to be moving around a lot?
Yes, I do.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Good. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah, hope you're enjoying yourself. So I'm meant to talk about riding, on the waves of change. And, we've overflogged the conversations as regards the world is changing. The world is changing at nanosecond pace. I've been a student of change management since 2005. I wrote my first book titled Thrive or Die. That was 2005. Now, most times people complain about change, but change is not something we need to complain about. I remember the serenity prayer that said, God, give me the courage to change the things I can change, and also the humility to accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference between the things I can change and things I cannot change. Now, the rate of change has changed and is also changing. So you cannot all change. You can only learn how to manage change, how to thrive and ride on the wings of change. Now, as much as everybody wants change, the change transition becomes a major challenge because of the pain. The other speaker was talking about stress. So many people are also change fatigue because there's a lot to do. You keep at the end of another change, and the shelf life of change is also changing because you see people talk about strategy. And in those days, when you do strategic planning, you do you can plan into 5 years plan, 10 years plan. But in the current world we live, I was reading a book called Traction. I was talking about long-term planning starts from 4 months ahead, meaning that you have to unlearn, relearn, and we have to respond that way. Now, if you look at the words of the former CEO of Nokia, he said something that struck me. He said, we did everything well, but we ended up losing out of what we're doing. Now, even when your organization is thriving today, if you're not careful, you're going to lose because of the wave of change. Because most times it's easy for us to want to idolize a model. Despite it is working or it has worked, does not mean it will work, because it's normal when we want to standardize. And we're living in a world whereby we must continually disrupt, continually change, continually look for ways to do things better. So I'm going to be talking about this. We've heard about the VUCA world, the Bani world. The world is almost unpredictable. And look at what happened in 2020. Nobody can forecast. And I tell people, nobody can forecast what's going to happen in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year. We can only look at trends, but I can tell things can just change. So now, normalizing this abnormality is the only way to survive, because it looks abnormal, but that's a new normal. So now I'm going to be talking about how to ride on the waves of change. I said that there are truths about change. It's no longer a surprise that things are changing. In my book, I wrote there that when you're surprised that you're surprised, it's actually a surprise, because there are no surprises again in our world. Things are changing, and that's how it's going to be. So change is no longer episodic. It is constant, fast, and also is disruptive. And one of the truths, again, is leaders who resist change get overwhelmed by it. Acceptance activates clarity. Resistance activates fear. So, why do I struggle with the waves I cannot control? The only thing I have control over is me, my response to change. So, the wave won't calm down. You must learn to ride it. Okay? How many of us surf here? Probably you surf. You love surfing. You know, it can be very, very scary. I have a picture here that can show you what happens there. The waves are real. And it's getting stormy. But you know, Sunburn, how best do you think, if you're a surfer, how best do you think you should ride? How best do you think you should run your organization? How best do you think you should run your career? Most times, they are all driven by factors you cannot control. You know, you cannot control what's going to happen. Now, I love being around my children. So somebody asked me, I remember when we were very young, our parents they have dreams of what we should become. Okay, you're going to become a doctor, you're going to become a lawyer, you're going to become something in the next couple of years. So somebody asked me and said, what's my goal or what's my dream for my kids? And I said, I don't have one. I said, how do you mean? Because the jobs that will be open, the new jobs that will evolve in the next couple of years, you cannot predict. Nobody predicted AI. Nobody predicted what's going to happen. The trending jobs in the next 10 years, nobody knows. So how do you have a dream for a 10-year-old of what will become 8 years? Because you might have a dream and get your kids expired because you cannot see the future. So you can position them for a profession that will make them struggle. So I told them, I said, no, I'm just getting them ready to be willing to constantly evolve anywhere they find themselves. So when we struggle as organizations, as HR professionals, to constantly adapt, learn new ways of doing things, we keep encouraging ourselves, adopt technology. You don't necessarily have to adopt. Much more will come. We don't even know, as AI is improving, getting more intelligent, a lot of disruption that we cannot even talk about in this conference. But all I know is what determines how good we should ride is the waves. We must learn how to ride in the midst of the storm. Check out these brands. They were very popular many years ago. Kodak, Nokia, and there's a lot of them. Yahoo. But all this, look at BlackBerry. How many of us once used BlackBerry? Everybody. But guess what? We're not loyal. Because we've all moved to other brands. And unknowingly. So if you fail to change, change will change you. If we fail to disrupt, then we're going to be left behind. So for us not to be left behind or get sunk in the waves of change, we must learn how to ride. So all these brands that we once used died. Why? Because they resisted change and they were changed. They were very late. To ride the waves of change, you must think like a surfer. Surfers don't fight the waves. They study it, ride it, and flow with the waves. Now, that puts us through a lot of stress and pressure. Because if you're going to live our life this way, it means that you must be constantly ready to destroy what works. We keep talking about competitive advantage, but how do we protect evolutionary advantage? Whereby as things change, your brand keeps surviving. I love what the first speaker was talking about, how they constantly have been disrupting in the last 25, 30 years. The brands that will trend, that will be there reigning in the next 50 years, it's all about our capacity to adapt, or should I say adopt, adapt, and adapt. Meaning we must constantly adopt new ways of doing things, adapt and change our models, change things we've been used to, and constantly adapt. Means become proficient in the things you don't know before. Let me give you a story. Now I provide some training interventions for some banks in Nigeria, and sometimes they come with requesting for solutions that we don't have around. I've learned to constantly be the solution to the problem, even when before the problem, I wasn't the solution. So you don't get scared, because so many times we cannot even prepare for the future. When the future comes, then our responsibility is to respond and to ensure that we make sure we navigate and make sure we will do well within that season. So let's look at, I wrote some things here as a roundup. As an organization, how do you ride? Because what HR needs to do, most times when I define HR, human resource management, would define it as putting in processes in place, systems in place to make sure we ensure our talents achieve the business goals. That's my definition, meaning that the reason for human resources is to ensure that your people, HR managers, are meant to manage the people in such a way that the business can achieve its goals. However, the business goalpost will constantly change because they need to evolve. Things are changing. We have factors like pestle, things you cannot control, factors outside of us. I remember the words of Jack Welch. He said, when the change around you is more than the change within you, your end is near. What does that mean? Meaning that if we don't constantly change within our organization, at the rate of change, we might also expire. We might become a dinosaur. Even in our career as individuals, if we don't constantly destroy your old you, the new you will not evolve. And that's why continuous learning is very, very important in this age. You cannot survive the future if you hate learning. If you cannot, you must constantly learn, so that because knowledge is evolving, there are new things coming up. And that's why it's all very, very good. I would say something about HRCI. Why as HR leaders, we must constantly position ourselves if we don't want to expire. Because we cannot allow the changes that our business is going through be more than the changes you as the HR professional is also going through. Meaning that you must disrupt at the rate of your business also. So if you look at this first one, we said accept change, or you'll be changed. You cannot struggle with change. Accept that you cannot do anything about the waves. You cannot do anything about the country. You cannot do anything about the economy. You cannot do anything about, the weather. All you can do is to adapt. Now, how many of us can stop winter? You cannot stop winter. You cannot stop summer. You cannot stop anything. You can only adapt your dressing, adapt your clothing, adapt the way you live so that you can survive, so that the weathers will not kill us. So be agile in your HR practice. Be agile in your HR practice. Sometimes you have to constantly restructure, constantly look at things differently. And I can tell you the rate at which you might restructure, it depends on the rate of change in your industry. So that's why when we talk about the waterfall and the agile environment, some environment you work is highly predictable. Some environment is highly destructive. So the way you're going to run your HR practice in an uncertain environment is going to be different from the ways you're going to be running your HR practice when in a certain environment. So many times I think about how life was 60 years ago. I feel people were able to plan better. I was telling my colleague a few days ago that there was more peace of mind 60, 70 years ago. Think about how Qatar, how Kuwait, how those nations were 60 years ago. And look at what's happening now, the rate of change everywhere. That means the world today is not a resemblance of what we used to know. So be agile in your HR practice, be a destroyer and a protector. Like I always say, keep what works and destroy what does not work. And sometimes, some things might work for another organization, but might not work for you. So you cannot just copy and paste. You know, some people just want to copy practices. They're doing this here. Every organization have different realities. You have different competitors, you have different strategy, you have different business goals. So we must constantly evolve our practices. Now, experiment fast. I love the word empiricism. You know, when we talk about empirical theory, whereby you quickly, in agile frameworks, we call it constantly taking spikes. You know, the world before, you can afford to practice this, ready, go, but now you need to shoot before you're ready. Because by the time you're trying to be ready, the bird has flown away. So you cannot do, you know, most times we overanalyze. We call it analysis paralysis. We overanalyze, waiting for the best time. There can never be a best time, you know, and you can never be perfect to start. You get started to be perfect, meaning that in the world we live in now, you have to constantly learn on the go. You know, most times during COVID, after COVID, so many people started coming up with courses like how to survive after COVID. Then I went to go and meet them. I said, have you lived after COVID? Have you lived in COVID before? Because I don't understand why you are teaching us how to survive outside COVID, because we are all experimenting. We're all learning something new. We're all seeing what we've not seen before. So there's no real model. These are models that you have to learn deliberately and constantly. So learn fast or risk dying without starting. Hire T-shaped talents. When we talk about talent acquisition, you don't want to hire specialists, because so many times there's a company in Nigeria. They were doing their management training, 6 months management training, and they wanted to deploy these talents, about 100 talents, into the business. When they were just 4 months into the management training program, the reason for that program expired. Now, you know, if you're a specialist, we call them I-shaped. I-shaped talents are talents that are very good at one thing. But the world we live in now, you must be jack of all trades, master of all. You cannot just know one thing. Look at the panelists. Somebody said, I'm from finance, I'm in HR, I've done this before. So you must be jack of all trades. You must open yourself to different kind of learning. So T-shaped talents are people that specialists are doing one thing well, and they also have cross-functional understanding of generalist understanding. But you see, the world also, we talk about the pie-shaped talents. People that are specialists are doing two things well, but they also are generalists, they're not oblivious about doing several things. But the future belongs to people, talents that can do several things well, and ready to pivot in case there's requirement in your industry. So as HR leaders, when you're hiring talents, try to look for people that have multiple skills that you can deploy to different roles when there's need. But when you think of only hiring one skilled person and you don't get people that you can push into different roles, then definitely your attrition rate will have to be very high, or you're going to retain people that are not adding value to your business. Now, discontinue the one-head principle. I used to say, one person can be smarter than some of us, but one person cannot be smarter than all of us. You see, if we put heads together, we can make things happen. If we work collaboratively well, it's enough for us to create systems that people will work in silo. We can only work collaboratively to create great products. Then the last one, rely on data, not intuition. We've heard so much about that. Data speaks. And the last, I brought something in, be psychologically ready. Also, create the environment that people are willing to try new things. Most people are scared of change because of policies, because of old practices. But I can tell you, organizations that are not willing to disrupt will expire. The waves will rise. The tides will shift. But leaders who ride with clarity always reach the shore. I can promise you what's going to happen in the world 5-6 years' time. All I promise you is, if you're willing to constantly disrupt yourself, look at the waves and look at things you need to do to be ahead in your industry, we will always have evolutionary advantage. I want you to look at your neighbor and say this to the person. I said, are you prepared? Say this to the person beside you, are you prepared? I want you to look at the person very close to you and say to the person, are you prepared for change? Yes. We are. Yeah. Thank you very much.